Esteemed PhD candidate, the College of Deans of this university, represented by us, has read your PhD thesis and the propositions that go with it and are ready to hear you defend it. Please take a seat. Does anyone in the audience wish to exchange ideas with a PhD candidate? If not, the opposition will be opened by Professor Ingold of the University of Fribourg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Estimated PhD candidate. First of all, I wanted to say that it's a great pleasure for me to be part of this jury. I appreciated very much your work, your research work, which is timely and introduces a lot of novelty. I want also to congratulate you for the manuscript, the quality of writing, which is very interesting, pleasant to read, and presenting a lot of convincing results. The document is also richly illustrated, but I have a little concern about the resolution of some images, especially regarding the results of binarization methods. I would have loved to see a bit more local details with a zoomed view, for instance, but it's really a minor aspect. So, I think after having made this introduction, I will now ask you a few questions. And as image binarization is a very fundamental step for document analysis, I have a first series of questions related to that topic. So estimated candidate, first, in your opinion, when is binarization useful? And when is it not, or when should it be avoided?
Highly learned opponent, thank you very much for your really nice and kind words. I really appreciate that. To answer your question, first I will also go to the comment about the images. Yeah, I will make sure that those images become available online. With the printed version, I indeed agree that some of the binarized images are not really clear. So yeah, thank you very much for the comment as well. As for the binarization, when it is needed, when not. So one of the key thing about all different kind of implicit information on handwriting analysis, for example, writer identification, dating, stylistic classification, or if you want to make some kind of topological development, it's really important that you focus on the handwriting itself, like the ink deposited on the material, not on the material itself. So in those kind of cases, especially the things that is covered in chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, I would say that binarization is indeed necessary because we don't want to make classification or regression based on things or based on aspects that are not really relevant. So we don't want to classify for the wrong reasons. So on those kind of cases, binarization is indeed necessary. But on the other hand, if you want to do some kind of processing on the material itself, or if you want to classify, let's say, what kind of parchment there is, and if you want to cluster different kind of manuscript based on the materials, I would say that maybe at that kind of cases, we would prefer not to do binarization. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Then, estimated candidate, if we move a bit further, for most binarization algorithms, classical algorithms, there are parameters that operate like a threshold. And their values influence the amount of border pixels that are attached to a component. So changing typically the thickness of strokes, is there a good criterion to decide which stroke thickness is optimal? And this, I would say, independently of the chosen parameter values.
Highly learned opponent, thank you again for a really nice question. As for different kind of methods based on thresholding, most of those methods really depends on the intensity of the pixels. And we, after all the work, we firmly believe, and also a lot of literature also supports that only the intensity cannot be the criteria in doing the binarization, because intensity alone is really difficult, especially with manuscripts that are at least 2,500 years old, and that has been degraded over time. Maybe for modern documents, doing a threshold-based analysis is nice. As for the second part of your question, deciding on the stroke width is a bit tricky and risky, I think. So doing it on the basis of selecting some hyperparameters, I would say that trainable filter would do much better in this case, like we presented in chapter 3, the binet network. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Then especially when you train your unit-like network, you need labeled data and also for evaluation. The question I have here is, first, is it correct that the annotations of your data is generated partly by an algorithm and then manually corrected by an expert? Is that correct? Did I understand that correctly?
Highly run opponent. No, actually what we did is first we manually labeled 51 of the manuscripts. So those are completely manually labeled by people, the domain expert people, the paleographers. And then we use those 51, and out of those 51, we use 40 images for training, 11 of them for testing, and that's how we train the model.
I have understood, but the people who annotated did that entirely manually. There is no algorithmic behind the generation of
yeah, highly learned opponent. Yeah, unfortunately, there was no automatic or semi-automatic help for the paleographer. In the audience, I know a lot of those paleographers are present, and it's possible that they don't like me anymore. I also written it in chapter 3 that one of the images might take 4 to 8 hours, but depending on the size of the image, it could take up to 20 hours of work, and that means like 20 hours of real work, not about office hours. And the other thing is that we were really careful that any kind of automatic or semi-automatic method would not bias the system, and that's why we asked. So I could have done it, but I didn't, because I'm not an expert of the domain. So we really asked the domain experts, the paleographers who really know what is written there, so that they can really pinpoint each of the pixels accurately. And I think that was one of the reasons that we could get really good results, and if I remember correctly, we could get up to almost 90% of F measures.
Okay, thank you very much for this very convincing answer. I don't know how much time I have.
I think your time is up, but maybe we get a second round and I'll get back to you, Professor.
Okay.
So thank you very much. So the opposition will be continued by Professor Brunet from the University of Twente.
Esteemed candidates, I also really enjoyed reading your thesis, also due to the good language and style. I'm also truly impressed by what you achieved as impact for this application field. I think it is really impressive what you can get per chapter. I would like to focus first on chapter 3, also the binarization of the images that you look at, and especially figure 3.1 and 3.2 on page 36 and 37. They show a lot of variability that you have in the foreground and the background of the documents regarding contrast as well as intensities. So could you state once more why the binarization as a pre-processing method is so important? Why not just an end-to-end analysis?
Highly learned opponent, thank you again. Thank you very much for your kind words and also taking the time to reading the thesis, this big one. And I really appreciate your comment. As for the binarization question, so we already mentioned briefly in section 3.1.1 that the issue is that with DSC scrolls, there are really large documents like Great IGA scroll that doesn't come in chapter 3, but do come in chapter 4, that there are majority of the people of the domain expert knowledge, they kind of agreed that this is written by one person, but there are also alternative views where people thought that, okay, it might be possible that this is written by two persons. Then also on the other hand, one of the really famous scholar, Ada Yerdeni, she proposed that it's possible that 70 or sometimes even 90 manuscripts are written by one person. Now, one of the key issues is that all these images show, or let's say all these manuscripts in their physical form, the fragment shows different kind of degradation, the color, the contrast, the intensity are different. So it's possible that here in figure 3.2, the first image and the second image you see, that the scholar are claiming they're written by the same person. But if I see the image as itself or the material, they show different kind of color, saturation, threshold values. Now, if we want to do any kind of writer identification or any kind of even classification based on these images, we were always afraid, and we did do a lot of experiments that we are getting results, sometimes good results, but maybe for wrong reasons because the material, the parchment looks similar. And a lot of time we are not really targeting what we want to target, that is the ink deposition, the writing. And that's why I think that to find the exact results on the targeted written part, allographs or the character shape, we needed to do binarization. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I agree with many of the statements. Despite the example that you gave as a counterexample, the thesis with the tank, that something could really go wrong, I also see a chance in, for example, information in the background, even if it could be misleading. So why not using a semantic segmentation approach if you would even ignore the background? So why not pixel-wise classification, but not just binary, but with having actually real values? Why isn't that a good generalization?
So we did a lot of feature calculations, and all of our features are dependent on how your character shapes look like. So for example, if I'm writing in the white paper with black, it's really easy for any kind of pattern recognition-based feature extraction to find what is written there. And we always wanted to measure the curvatures, the slant of the writings. So if we wanted to do a full semantic segmentation directly on the pixels, we could always run the risk that the curvatures or the slants are not exactly calculated on the skeleton of the characters. So that was one risk, but we also really acknowledge what you say, and we thought that, okay, we are ignoring a lot of information in the background. What if there is something? And this is what we tried to cover a bit outside of the thesis in chapter 8, in the appendix part, where it did use the binarization, but not to take out the characters completely, but to take out the background material so that we could find any kind of relationship on the background material of each of the fragments. So it was you can say, a bit of tangent of our works, but we tried to find our clusters among if the parchment is coming, let's say, from the same animal, or if the papyrus and the repetitive patterns of the papyrus could indicate if it was cut from the same big piece of a papyrus or not. So this is something we really acknowledge, but with the limitation of data and with the limitation of really trainable data, we couldn't take the risk of not targeting the exact pixels that we wanted to target. Thank you very much.
Yeah. One of the core elements of the VNet architecture is to use the UNet and get motivated by UNet and pixel-to-pixel approach. But why is it a good choice in terms of robustness against all these different variations?
Hi, Lila and opponent. Thank you again for the really intuitive question. So, to be honest, it was not the first choice, obviously we had. We did go through a lot of iterations, and then we ended up with the model that we have now, that is presented here, the BINET. One of the key issues we had is that the first opponent that I answered, we only had 40 images to train on, and that is really like a really gigantic task to do, that you train with 40 images and then you are binarizing 30,000 images. So we wanted to make sure that all the information that is present on those 30 images is properly utilized properly transferred into all the weights are updated. So that's why I think even though UNet came from medical image processing, it holds the really good criteria that it can be trained with a smaller number of images. The other key point is the skip connection that the UNet had. It really made a precise localization. That was one thing. Also, we had another constraint, we had another opportunity that we used is the multispectral images. So we thought that we could use the multispectral images in a network that can handle it. And in that aspect, we also kind of put in the middle of PIX2PIX and UNet so that the generative aspect is also there. It can produce images that are binarized, and also it could use the pseudo color or the fused images from the multispectral bands. So that was also one of the things that after experimentation we thought, okay, let's settle down with that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I ask my final question?
I think we're...
Okay, that's good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Brunet. Let me ask Professor Jaeger then to continue the opposition from the University of Groningen.
Esteemed candidate, so first of all, I joined the earlier examiners in their very positive appraisal of your thesis. I want to add one more thing that I loved about it. So I teach machine learning, and today every student expects machine learning to be deep learning, super huge, everything super big, and Google in a nutshell. And I tell them, sometimes you have small data sets and you still want to extract useful and beautiful information, impactful information out of it, and then you can't, you can't use models with millions of parameters to estimate, period. And your thesis is a wonderful demonstration of this elementary condition of machine learning and model estimation. If you don't have so gigantic data sets, you have to use all the skills, all the modesty of making the right design decisions without throwing gigantic cannons at data. Be careful, know what you're doing, insert previous knowledge as much as you can, be insightful, play with the data, try to understand them, the full spectrum of craftsmanship, and then you might get good results. And that's what you did, and I will use it if I ever will be asked by students again for why I teach them all of these things. I will tell them here. You can have a very impactful, beautiful, crafted system at the end that doesn't use a gigantic neural network. Well, your pixel segmentation subnetwork, okay. But there you have so many pixels to train it on. So that's... Okay, so that was that I really loved about your thesis. And now I have also a number of questions, and one of them relates to section 6, about this ENOC system. This system was trained on very high quality training data, namely radiocarbon dated scripts, but you had only 20-something, 25, 27 of them. So that's really a small training data set. And you explore and develop a relatively complex architecture to estimate or to predict the dates of these, with a lot of design decisions. And I assume that when you developed your pipeline, you tried out many things and tested them with cross-validation, textbook-wise, again and again and again, and found until everything was looking good. So now there is a danger if you have a small data set and very often use cross-validation to optimize your design decisions. That's almost like doing stochastic gradient descent on cross-validation. So in a sense, there is a danger that you actually optimized, that you overfit, to put it bluntly. May I have your answer on this critical point?
Highly learned opponent. Thank you again. Thank you for your really kind words. It means a lot coming from you. Yeah, thank you very much. About the radiocarbon data, we indeed used at the end 24 manuscripts. So we had in the beginning 30, and then we had to reject 6 of them, and we could use 24 of them. And out of those 24 manuscripts altogether, because the manuscripts were distributed into several different fragments, we could make 60 images out of that, and we used those 60 images indeed to do a lot of cross-validation. You're right, because there was a lot of decision on parameter tuning, selecting hyperparameters. So in all the process, we made sure that we do one test, obviously always, that we do leave one out test, just to make sure that one or the either is not making a problem. So out of all the manuscript, one is not making a problem. And the other thing that we did make sure to do is that we added noise, we did data augmentation, and then we ran the experiments again to double check if we are really running the risk. But even then, we do agree also in the conclusion, we do say that there is a biasness within the data itself. Because of the calibration curve of the radiocarbon itself, we have a biasness around the year -200 to -100, and those is always reflected. But also there is a really nice thing about the Bayesian-rich regression model that we use, is that it is trying to find similarity within the training data, and then it kind of projected to the any test prediction. So rather than really looking for dissimilarities as the paleographer do, we are looking for similarities. So we could really check in a way, maybe a lot of time manually, that if the predictions are going well or not. That's true. But I also agree with your point that we do run the risk that we are going into a slope where we can be overfitting, but we tried our best in all possible ways with dropout, with leave one out, and all the different kind of procedure that could be done to make sure that we are not really depending completely on the training data, and every bias and variance is really focused on that.
So if I understand right, so you checked also some model variations, and they still worked reasonably similarly to the ones that you document in the thesis.
Yeah, you are right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to be sure that one is not hallucinating a super solution. I have one more question. In this graphic, if I have time for that?
Yeah, sure.
In this graphic on page. No, I forgot. Page 160. And later in the appendix, when you pull these apart, these different color bars, most of the model predictions coincide very well with the radiocarbon predictions, except 3, where you have a systematic deviation. And my question is, do you think this is good or bad, that you have not perfect, you could say, model fitting of these high-quality radiocarbon data? But mostly, yes, but there are also few examples among those 25 where you have this deviation. Good or bad?
Highly learned opponent. In short answer, is extremely good. In an elaborate answer, if I may, I think it also shows that this is what it is. We didn't tamper with anything. This is what it came out. We also have explanation, really elaborate explanation of why this is happening. I think this is extremely good, especially in the case you see where the prediction is a lot of time narrower than the radiocarbon itself. So are we doing better than radiocarbon? No, these are two different disciplines, but using one or leveraging radiocarbon, we could be precise where we have multiple radiocarbon samples. But also in areas where we don't have enough radiocarbon samples, we might get a broader prediction. But there is also one key point that really does not say about what is going on is the image itself. The radiocarbon, all the processing is done on a small portion like 8 or 10 milligram of physical sample, and then counting the isotope 14C. For our cases, we are relying on the image itself. And when I say image itself, I'm saying the things that is written there. And a lot of time, let's say the one that is Masada 1K or Murabat 19 even, okay, it is internally dated, but let's say for Masada 1K, it's possible that the number of characters that is there in the manuscript is not sufficient. And then it is also difficult for the model to get a narrower prediction, because it's not enough to do a proper feature calculation. And then we are kind of, just to be sure we are broadening, or the model is broadening, the whole prediction in itself. So to answer your question, it's obviously good, but it also shows that there is limitations. And it is not perfect like a lot of models, and there is also scope to improve it.
Yeah, thank you for your answer, and now I will pass on this role to the next interviewer.
Okay, thank you. We're turning to this side of the table. Professor Waring from the University of Amsterdam.
Esteemed candidate, I also think your thesis is impressive and very good work, but given the time that we have, I'll leave it at that. The other praise will come later. I do have some questions, of course. So I'll particularly focus on chapter 4, where you really, and also in the other chapters, really focus on developing very nice features that are a good description of your of the data that you have. But to a very large extent, the similarity between the elements that you're looking at is as important or maybe even more important. Do you agree with that that's an important component?
Highly learned opponent, thank you for your question. Would you rephrase your question so that I understand it correctly?
So you focus a lot on defining the correct features, yes?
Right, yeah.
But then you have two elements, you need to compare them. So you need a similarity function or a dissimilarity function. And you spend less time on that. But I would argue that the similarity between elements is as important, because you do things like clustering. You do a lot of things where you have to compare two elements rather than having the elements themselves.
Highly learned opponent, thank you for your question. I think it's a valid question. One of the key issues, especially for chapter 4, is that in the beginning we had no idea if there is any breaking point, if there is any separation. It was 54 columns of handwritten text, and in the beginning we just assumed it's one writer. And then we did spend a lot of time in perfecting our feature, obviously. We did it intentionally in a way so that we get a proper idea of what is the writer doing in itself, the curvature, the slant, and it is a signature both in the genetic aspect of the writer, also the mimetic aspect of the writer, that it is coming out as, representation of the writer itself. We don't see the writer, but as a representation. After doing that, even just with the raw features and then doing some kind of a feature reduction like PCA, we could already see that there is a breaking point. So we could make a decision right away at that point. Yes, there is a breaking point. But for there, we also did, like data augmentation, just to be sure that these are not natural movement of the writer among the field of the PCA. And then on the secondary analysis, we did 5 different kind of statistical tests to make sure that what we are getting is right. But I completely also agree, there is also scope to use some more similarity measures,
And then you use a projection to the 2D space using coherent networks, which is already quite an old technique. So why didn't you use T-SNE or UMAP, so the more advanced or the more modern projection-based methods which really take that similarity into account?
Highly learned opponent, thank you very much. We did use TSNE, it's not presented here. We also did use TSNE, but at the end we found out that PCA is one thing much more easily explainable than TSNE, for example, is parameter heavy, and our problem is not that parameter heavily complex. So PCA in and itself with that 3-dimensional space could easily indicate what is going on. And we also always had to make sure that we can communicate whatever we found out properly and nicely to the other domain or the other collaborators. And that was, in the whole thesis, that was one of the part that the interpretability, explainability is always there. Otherwise, it's difficult to just present a black box, because we also want to build trust that whatever we are doing, people understand it, who are not exactly from our domain or our field, and they build trust on top of that. So I think over time, when we have trust, we can always present TSNE and even more heavier models, and that would be a really good idea in the future.
Because you are using the cohort networks as a way to show it. This is how they are organized.
Yeah.
Thesis or UMAP give you a far more rich description, not showing only, well, these are next to each other, but also they are grouped or not, so you can see your clusters.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah.
And you already mentioned the PCA that you were using in Chapter 4, which you use to project from the high-dimensional space that you're looking at to a three-dimensional space. Well, the first question I had was, why not use UMAP for that? But you already explained that. But why 3 dimensions? Why not 2 or 4 or 20? Or where did the 3 come from?
To answer it simply, it's just the visualization purpose. It's really easy because, yeah, this is just a 2-dimensional image of the 3-dimensional space in the thesis. We did actually develop a small tool where people can really visualize the 3-dimension and then rotate it, and this is what we pass to our colleagues in the humanities field so that can really rotate and see what is going on, which of the outliers or which of the manuscripts that are going far, which are close, and then when you do it in 3-dimensional space, it's much more easier to comprehend as a human, I think, than, let's say, we could always do it in 4 dimensions, then I would run the risk of how to explain it properly, what is going on, and what is even 4 dimension. How do I explain it in simple words? That's, I think, difficult. And yeah, we could always go to 2 dimension, obviously, but yeah, we choose to remain in 3 dimension, not go further.
Yeah, but I would say that the 3 dimensions, as you explained, is only useful if you have the interaction with it.
Yeah, exactly.
If you don't have the interaction,
we did have the interaction. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, but yeah, unfortunately, it's not really visible in PDF or the printed copy. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I would like to give the floor to Dr. Kasai from the University of Groningen.
Esteemed candidate, first of all, I would like to thank you and your supervisor to preparing such a nice and unique thesis. I really enjoy reading it. I have several questions about first chapter 1 and then chapter 2 and 4. So about chapter 1, so in continuation of the previous discussion, I would like to ask you, why didn't you try different type of distance function? Just you try chi-square error in order to find out the similarity between 2 instances.
Very learned opponent. Thank you very much for your question. So one of the really amazing thing, or not, I would say more useful thing about chi-square distance or similar distance like Bhattacharya distance, it works really well when you have data that looks kind of similar to histogram. For example, if you think about Manhattan distance, Euclidean distance, L1, L2, those are really good when you are working with a bit lower dimension of the data. And most of the time, we used feature and the feature extraction, and then when you used hinge feature extraction, depending on how many number of bins you're using, it can go up to 253 dimensionality to 456, and with allographic feature, we had like more than 5,200 dimensionality. So in those kind of cases, if we could do something like an L1 or L2 distances, it would not really reflect the actual differences between the feature because they would find a direct distance, and we really don't want to do that. So chi-square, on the other hand, also Bhattacharya, we could have used that, but they are more or less similar. So chi-square, on that hand, has the potential to really capture the actual differences between this high dimensionality feature file, and that was the reason we did use chi-square distance here.
Thank you. So about the next question is about generating the data. You try to use GIMP software to generate the ground truth data, which I guess is like really labor intensive. Since you're at the end of your PhD trajectory, do you have in mind any other approach in order to accelerate this kind of generating the data? Make it automated.
Very round opponent. Thank you for the questions. I think there are tools which we can really put it into a web server. So my supervisor also has a web server like Monk, where you can go and then incorporate something where you can use some kind of tool, let's say a tablet, to kind of like overwrite in the pixels. That would make people's life much more easier. About the tool, the software GIMP, we used it for the main purpose of using it is like open source free software. So you could really use it, give it to everyone, and everybody could use it. That's one thing. The other thing is that it's extremely easy to use. The learning curve is like that, and then you can teach it to anyone, and then they can work like in half an hour, and then they can really process the images. So we wanted something that we can share with everyone, and then everyone can use it, because we did pass those images to several different paleographers and ask them to really mark each of the pixels. And for now, I really cannot think of a software that is open source and freely available and do the same thing. So I think that is one of the purposes I used GIMP. And the other thing is...
Do you believe that the trained BINET network that you use during your PhD, so it can be an approach to even make this process a bit faster?
Thank you for this really interesting question. We did do this in chapter 3. So basically what we did is that we gave the fragment images to the paleographers, and they did mark it with each of the pixels, what is ink, what is not ink. We used that, we trained the BINET network, and then we binarized the fragment images. We binarized the fragment images. Then we used transfer learning to do the same thing, but with a different data set, the DeepQ images. And that the DeepQ images is much more similar to the plate images. So in the Thesis call, you have the full plate images where the background is white and you have the color things, and then each of the fragment is image in multispectral bands. So then we used the BINET network to binarize the plate images, which were colored, and then use those output as an input to binarize the color images of the fragment. So yes, we did use that in some parts. So in that part, it is kind of like in the middle and nobody realized what is happening. But to make it semi-automatic, I think we could use a tablet that would make all the people's life much more easier. And maybe this is something we could think really in the future.
Yeah. So if I have time, I have like one more question, like 2 questions. One, like really fast one about... really fast one. Yeah, about figure 3.6. You try to find an order to put like a specific wavelengths in R or G or B channel of an RGB image. Does the order matter here, or if you change the order of the images, does it influence on the final result?
Very learned opponent. This ordering, as it is in figure 3.6, is really important that we maintain this ordering. Why? Because the first image that goes into the R channel and the last image that goes into the B channel, both of them are in the visible spectrum. So one is 595 nanometer and another one is 638 nanometer. And then the middle one is on the near infrared range, 924 nanometer. But because this one is in the near infrared range, we could see that this band could see much more than what we could see in the normal visible light. So that was one of my intention, to put it in the green channel, and that's why the fused image or the color image that you see, that there is a dominance of the green channel. Now if you put it in the blue channel, it doesn't really make much of a difference, then the image would look like more bluish. But what is important that what you do here, you do it for all the images of the same exact order of the images. That's really important.
Okay, thank you. And I now pass on the opposition to Professor Verheij of the University of Groningen.
Thank you, esteemed candidate. Very nice to read your thesis and also to hear you discuss it here and defend it here. And also I would like to thank you because you are completing the set of faculties that AI is relevant for. And this also has an anecdotal side to it. I once said, yeah, AI is now so popular except perhaps for the Faculty of Theology. And Professor Schomaker was in the room, and he raised his hand and said, Bart, you are naive, so naive. That was a good moment and a lesson, so thank you for your work. And I would like to speak with you about the interdisciplinary side of your project, because it is clearly a hybrid intelligence project, as I now like to call it. It's a national project where the idea is that machines and humans can do more than they can do either by themselves. And also that is, I think, a goal of what you have been trying to do. The machine cannot do it alone, and the humans cannot do it alone, and well, you show there examples of. So what I did was I looked up the word expert in your thesis. And well, the first thing that I found was some tasks can only be done by experts, not by machines. Also you say, yeah, they provide expertise about a field. You speak with them and they learn you something. Also you say they serve as an audience of machine output. And then trustworthiness and explainability are very important. You also say that they can provide a ground truth. Sometimes you need something, right? Because otherwise your algorithms cannot even start. You say also they can interpret the statistics and make decisions on the basis of them. So then they really do something with what you show them. And they validate predictions as realistic or not. And they serve, and that's what I was also happy to find, as AI experts. So that is you, right? So you are also listed as one of the experts that play a role. So I just wanted to ask you, you have in a sense developed a shared language between paleographers and AI experts, with you having a clear role and the paleographer have a clear role. Maybe you can expose a little bit what was a very hard moment to convince them, what was a very successful moment.
Highly learned opponent, thank you very much for your nice comments and also the question. People always talk about nice moments when it's about past, and they try not to talk about hard moments. But yeah, in general, it was difficult in a way that to get adapted with the whole situation. I can give you a simple, real example that comes to my mind. Like, we go to doctors and they measure like blood pressure. And they say, yeah, if you have 80 to 120, it's good. But now we don't really think what is 80 and 120. And how many of us think, okay, it's like like some pressure of barometer or no. Nobody really cares about it. Why? Because the trust has already built up on that. And you know that it has to be 80 and 120. And if it goes to 160 something, it's really wrong. It's the same here, that over time, I think with a lot of iteration, a lot of conversation, we slowly started to build trust. In the beginning, I also had to adopt on explaining things, because when I explain things to one of my AI colleagues, it's much more different than when I explain things to one of my colleagues from paleography. It is how it is always, and that's the thing I always had to adapt in the beginning, and I personally think I really enjoyed it, but I also have to ask the colleagues from paleography if they really enjoyed it or not. But in general, I really enjoyed the whole moment, but it was challenging in times. And a lot of times I always had presentation on a single topic, and one is for AI, one is for the Faculty of Theology, and now it's Faculty of Religion. So we always had to adapt on that aspect, and that is sometimes, in the beginning, it felt like maybe I'm not really understandable, or maybe what I'm doing is not really explainable. But over time, when you explain it with, with patience and with adaptation, it really goes through. And then there is this really equilibrium or symbiosis that goes into. And once that is established, I think things goes really smooth and nice as it is going now.
So AI is just another tool for people in theology, just like C14, just like writing analysis, handwriting analysis by hand, just another tool, or are we already there?
If we believe, I think we are. This is something I think it will develop more over time. I still think that AI is still in the early stage compared to a lot of other fields. Let's think about radiocarbon dating. It is there for last 60, 70 years, but the whole structure or whole benchmark basement that it is standing has been there for thousands of years. For AI, I think we still need to go a lot, especially with the current boom, but I think also we are starting to build trust among different faculties.
The College of Deans will withdraw for some time to consider its decision. Esteemed PhD candidate, the College of Deans of this university, represented by us, after reading your PhD thesis and the accompanying propositions, and after hearing you defend it, has decided to award you the PhD degree at the University of Groningen, which you desire. Your primary supervisor, Professor Schomaker, is authorized to award you this honor in customary fashion.
I'm happy to accept the task assigned to me by the Rector Magnificus. However, before performing this task, I would like to address a few personal words to you. Dear Maruf, where to begin? You started out as an AI PhD student with already some international experience, and then started working in the Dead Sea Scrolls EU project, of which the second supervisor, Mladen Popovic, was the principal investigator. Your part in the project required a lot of interaction with other researchers and domain experts from paleography, the scholarly field that analyzes historic handwritings manually and visually. So in fact, many technical design choices that were made had to do with this. Do they still understand it? If you make a single network with pixels in and a decision out, what would be the reaction of people from that other discipline? And they were already so skeptical. Mladen had already contacted me around 2009 about the possibilities of AI for handwriting. At the time, we did mostly writer identification. Later, our group collected manuscript dating experience in medieval documents, so it was clear that there was a potential here in Groningen for interesting research, especially on the Dead Sea Scrolls. And when Mladen's ERC grant was obtained, we were extremely lucky in finding you. Your cooperative attitude was an essential ingredient for the successes we obtained. You needed to explain all those technicalities to scholars. Even means and standard deviations needed to be explained. So the language was completely different, and the way of thinking also. Conscientiously, you helped them with image processing and the analysis. They had individual questions, which are not even in the thesis, but they cost you a lot of work. But these good working relationships also made it possible to entice these scholars to provide those highly valuable and detailed training data that you explained, where you said that maybe they don't like me so much anymore. But this is to confirm that nobody in the world had this kind of detailed data at the pixel level concerning the decision of ink versus parchment or papyrus. Where is the ink in the scan? And because the statements you want to make are about the ink and not about anything else. Along the way, you came up with many creative solutions for the AI problems we encountered, always doing just a bit more in order to be absolutely certain about the results. And in a way, the project was against the stream because everyone wants big models and so on, and deep learning. And we had to explain to people from our field again and again that in this particular case, you can only use deep learning in particular cases like the binarization. And also, what is also should be clear, and this is you could do this because of indeed your attitude. This is a sensitive topic. Yeah, if you make statements about the Dead Sea Scrolls, that's not just something with Dhali or ChatGPT. This has consequences in scholarly research. So you were collaborative, cooperative. So extensive even that Mladen and I at the point also started to worry a little bit, will this booklet arrive? Because we had papers out, etc. But of course, to be an assistant prof, which was in the making, you need to have this booklet. And that took some time. Because in an entrepreneurial way, you also attracted bachelor students, master students. You assisted me in the handwriting recognition course. And this was also noticed by our director of teaching, who is also present in the room, which means that suddenly there were activities that had to do with teaching. What struck me there is that you showed a mature way of dealing with students, treating them fairly in a natural manner, and you really cared about teaching. And so this, of course, gradually you rolled into this mature role with some seniority towards this assistant prof position. I think at this point, you are even ready to start supervising your own PhD student, and there may also be possibilities for that. Therefore, we hope to keep you here in Groningen for the exciting new research in the coming years, and I wish you and your family all the best. At this moment, I would like everyone to rise. Uit kracht van de bevoegdheid ons bij de wet toegekend volgens het besluit van het College voor Promoties van deze universiteit verklaar ik, Lambert Schomaker, u, Maruf Dhali, te bevorderen tot dokter en u alle rechten te verlenen die door wet of gewoonte aan het doctoraat aan de Rijksuniversiteit zijn verbonden. Als dokter belooft u in de toekomst te handelen naar de Nederlandse gedragscode wetenschapsbeoefening.
Yes, I promise.
Now that you can be seated again. Now that I have performed the task assigned to me, let me be the first to congratulate you on your PhD and to address you with doctor.
As proof of this PhD degree, I will present you with this certificate signed by Director Magnicus, Secretary and Supervisors, and sealed by the Great Seal of the University. But before doing so, very learned sir, it's my pleasant duty to congratulate you, also on behalf of the College of Deans of the University, on the degree you have been awarded. Congratulations, very well done. And here is the diploma. And And normally we would give you the Liber Arbor Coram, but they ran out. So you get your own thesis back, but now with something written in it by all. A reminder of I now declare this ceremony to be closed.